dismissed, forgotten, banished to obscurity for the unforgivable sin of being unremarkable. That was Miss Evelyn Grace Harrow's fate until she disappeared from London's glittering ballrooms, determined to prove that worth existed beyond beauty. Now, 5 years later, she returns, no longer invisible, no longer the plain girl they sent away. The Duke who dismissed her with casual cruelty will face her again, but this time she will not be the one fading into insignificance. London, March 1863. The crystal chandeliers of Lady Ashford's ballroom blazed with such brilliance that guests squinted against the glare. Miss Evelyn Grace Harrow stood near the conservatory entrance, positioned between two towering arrangements of white lilies, and wondered why she continued allowing herself to be persuaded into attending these elaborate displays of social hierarchy. The answer resided across the room in emerald silk and diamonds. Lady Beatrice Harrow, her stepmother, who collected social victories the way other women collected pressed flowers, whose beauty at 43 remained perfectly preserved through expensive creams and rigid corsetry. At 23, Evelyn understood precisely what society thought of her. The whispers followed her through drawing rooms like inescapable shadows. Poor plain Evelyn, unfortunate creature. At least she possesses adequate manners. One supposes that counts for something, though clearly not enough. She had learned to make herself small, to occupy as little of the world's attention as possible, to move through rooms as though apologizing for her existence. If she could not be beautiful, and this had been established beyond dispute, perhaps she could become invisible. Her gown of pale grey silk, outdated by 3 seasons and simple where others wore elaborate creations, whispered against her legs. Her dark blonde hair, neither properly golden nor entirely brown, had been arranged in modest coils adorned only by her late mother's small garnet comb, the sole piece of jewellery she owned that had not been sold to pay her father's gambling debt. Around her, silk rustled like distant ocean waves, punctuated by laughter that seemed always to carry an edge of cruelty. Her hazel eyes moved across the glittering assembly with the careful observation of someone who had spent a lifetime watching rather than participating. And there, near the grand marble staircase, stood the gravitational centre of every female gaze in the room. Lord Adrien Blackwell, Duke of Blackwell, was 31 years old and possessed aristocratic bearing that seemed woven into his bones. Tall and dark-haired with features that might have been carved by a classical sculptor, he wore his black evening coat with casual perfection. His grey eyes surveyed the ballroom with assessing coolness, determining which prospects merited attention. He stood among gentlemen who clearly considered themselves his equals in everything except title and wealth, but there was no question who commanded the group. Lord William Ashford leaned close to say something that made the Duke's mouth quirk in what might have been amusement. Evelyn had been watching the Duke peripherally for an hour, not with foolish romantic hope. She had learned long ago that such fantasies belonged to beautiful women, but with the quiet attention of someone who existed on the margins and had learned to find interest in observation itself. She was so absorbed that she failed to notice Lady Beatrice's approach until her stepmother's voice cut through the conversation like a blade through silk. Poor Evelyn, Beatrice's voice carried with perfect projection. So plain, so utterly forgettable. One must admire her courage in attending these gatherings, knowing she will spend the evening pressed against the wallpaper like part of the decorative scheme. The words landed with the precision of an assassin's knife. Nearby guests, Lady Ashford in peacock blue, Miss Hartwell with her perfect blonde ringlets, tittered behind painted fans. The sound was delicate, feminine, utterly cruel. Evelyn's fingers tightened on her fan until she forced herself to relax before damaging this small object her mother had carried. Her face remained composed in the expression of pleasant neutrality she had perfected through countless similar encounters. But inside, something cracked, not broke. She had endured too much to break over mere words, but cracked like fine china, developing hairline fractures that weakened the structure fundamentally. She became aware of other eyes turning toward her. The assessment was swift and unanimous. Yes, poor plain Evelyn, exactly as Lady Beatrice described. "I say, Blackwell." Lord William Ashford's voice rose loud enough for Evelyn to hear every word. "Show the poor creature some kindness. One dance would not kill you. It might even be considered charitable." Evelyn's breath caught. She had not realized the Duke's attention had turned in her direction at all. For one terrible, hopeful moment, Evelyn made the mistake of looking directly at the Duke. The contact lasted perhaps 2 seconds, long enough for her to see the assessment in his gaze, long enough for something like hope to flutter in her chest despite all her experience. And then the dismissal. He looked away as one might look away from something mildly distasteful. When he spoke, his voice carried the bored drawl of absolute certainty. "I dance with ladies who enhance my standing, Ashford, not diminish it through association. I have no interest in charity cases, particularly those who seem designed by nature to serve as cautionary examples rather than objects worthy of masculine attention." The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Conversation did not stop. That would have been too obvious. But the quality of sound changed. People pretended not to have heard, while ensuring they missed not a single syllable. Evelyn could feel their satisfaction, their vindication. Here was confirmation of what they all believed. She was beneath notice, unworthy even of pity. Lady Beatrice's smile was triumphant, sharp as broken glass. For a long moment, Evelyn simply stood there, her untouched champagne growing warm in her gloved hand. They expected tears, expected her to flee in humiliation, expected some dramatic display that would provide entertainment for the remainder of the evening. She would not give them that satisfaction. With movements as deliberate as a dancer's, Evelyn set down her champagne glass. She met Lady Beatrice's gaze directly, saw the challenge there, the triumph. Then, without a word, she turned and walked toward the ballroom's exit, moving through the crowd with measured grace, spine straight and head high. She did not hurry, did not gather her skirts and run. She simply moved through the crowd with deliberate steps, maintaining the illusion of calm, even as her heart raced and her vision narrowed. The sea of silk and jewels parted to let her pass, guests stepping aside, as though avoiding contamination. Whispers followed in her wake. "Did you hear what the Duke said? How devastatingly accurate. Poor creature. Though he is not wrong." Evelyn heard none of it, or rather, she heard all of it, and let it wash over her without penetration. She had learned this skill over years of being the object of such commentary. The terrace doors stood open to the cool March evening. She stepped through them into air that felt clean and cold, into relative silence where the sounds of the ballroom became muffled background noise. She moved to the stone balustrade and gripped it with both hands, grateful for something solid and real. The night sky stretched above her, vast and indifferent. Stars glittered with cold beauty. London sprawled in all directions, a constellation of gaslight and shadow. For the first time that evening, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Evelyn allowed her composure to crack. A single tear slid down her cheek, warm against cool skin. She brushed it away quickly, almost angrily. "I will not break," she whispered to the indifferent stars. The words were a vow. Whatever happened next, whatever additional humiliations society planned for her, she would endure it with the same quiet dignity she had cultivated over years of being invisible. Behind her, the ball continued its glittering progress, as though nothing significant had occurred. The Duke doubtless danced with ladies who enhanced his reputation. Lady Beatrice accepted compliment, satisfied with her evening's work. The world turned on its axis, utterly unchanged by one unremarkable woman's humiliation. Evelyn stood alone on the terrace until the cold drove her inside, until the tears stopped and the shaking subsided, and the rage transformed into something colder and harder, something that might be called determination. Then she slipped through the corridors with practiced invisibility, searching for a footman to summon her carriage. She did not return to the ballroom. She simply left, disappearing into the London night like smoke dissipating into darkness. The morning room of Harrow House received sunlight through tall windows overlooking a modest garden where roses struggled against London's cold, dark air. Evelyn sat at the mahogany table, a cup of tea cooling before her untouched. She had not slept. The events of the previous evening played in her mind with relentless repetition, designed by nature to serve as a cautionary example, rather than an object worthy of masculine attention. The words should not have hurt as much as they did, should not have penetrated defences she had spent years building. But something about the Duke's casual dismissal, about the ease with which he had reduced her to nothing, had lodged in her chest, like a physical object. The door opened with decisive energy that announced Lady Beatrice before she appeared. "Ah, Evelyn, Excellent. We need to discuss your future. Her stepmother swept into the room in amber silk that made her pale skin luminous. She settled into the chair across from Evelyn with the satisfied air of someone about to deliver news they particularly enjoyed. Evelyn set down her teacup carefully. "Good morning, Lady Beatrice. I have made arrangements," Beatrice announced without preamble. "You are to go to Thornfield Cottage in Cornwall indefinitely. The air will do you good, and frankly, your presence here has become an embarrassment to the family name." The words took a moment to penetrate. Thornfield Cottage. The estate had been her mother's childhood home, passed to Evelyn's father upon marriage, and then essentially abandoned after her mother's death. Evelyn had not seen Thornfield in over a decade. "But that property has been closed for years," Evelyn said, her voice flatter than intended. "It cannot be habitable." "It will suit you perfectly then," Beatrice interrupted, her smile sharp as cut glass. "Solitude for the solitary. I have already sent word to have the manor aired out. You leave in 4 days. Evelyn stared at her stepmother, searching for some sign of hesitation. She found none. This was settled, decided, and final. "You are banishing me." The words emerged as statements rather than questions. "Don't be melodramatic, Evelyn. I am providing you with a comfortable retreat where you will not be subjected to the rigors of society that so clearly distress you. After last night's incident, after the Duke of Blackwell's perfectly reasonable observation, it is clear that London is not the proper environment for you." The subtext was clear. In Cornwall, you will be invisible through geographic isolation. You will not embarrass me. You will cease to exist in any way that matters. "And if I refuse?" Evelyn asked, though she already knew the answer. Beatrice's eyes hardened. "This house belongs to the Winters estate, which I manage. You have a small independence from your mother, barely £500 annually, hardly enough to maintain yourself even in modest circumstances. You may choose to use that pittance to establish yourself in some dingy set of rooms in an unfashionable quarter, subject to gossip about what scandal drove you from your family home. Or you may accept my generous offer of Thornfield Cottage." Evelyn recognized a trap with no exit. Beatrice had planned this carefully, waiting only for an appropriate excuse. Last night's humiliation provided the perfect justification. 4 days, Evelyn repeated softly. 4 days, Beatrice confirmed. "I will have Stevens arrange the travel." "Really, Evelyn, you should be grateful." She rose and glided from the room, leaving behind the scent of French perfume and the wreckage of Evelyn's life. At his club, White's on St. James Street, the Duke of Blackwell sat in a leather chair near the fire, listening to conversations swirling around him without particular interest. "Winters packed off his plain daughter to Cornwall," someone remarked. "Lord Dunmore, perhaps," though Adrien did not bother turning his head to confirm. "Can't say I blame him," another voice added. "Girl was a millstone around the family's neck. Better to remove her from sight." Adrien felt something flicker in his chest, something uncomfortable that might have been guilt. He had not thought of the Winters girl since the previous evening, or rather he had thought of her only briefly before sleep, when her face had surfaced uninvited. That quiet, composed dignity as she walked from the ballroom, designed by nature to serve as a cautionary example rather than an object worthy of masculine attention. His own words, clever and cutting, exactly the sort of wit his circle appreciated. Lord William had laughed. Others had smiled knowingly. It had been a successful rejoinder by all objective measures. But now, sitting in comfort with brandy and fire, Adrien found the memory less satisfying than it should have been. She was being sent away. Not because of him specifically, surely her stepmother had her own reasons, but certainly because of the society he represented and reinforced through his participation, his judgments, his willingness to treat people as objects to be assessed, rather than humans to be known. He took another sip of brandy, willing the thought away. She would be happier in Cornwall, away from the pressures of society, away from constant assessment. Perhaps he had done her a favour, had given her the push she needed to escape a world that was destroying her slowly. The rationalization felt thin even as he constructed it, but Adrien Blackwell, Duke of Blackwell, had spent 31 years learning to believe comfortable lies about himself. This was simply one more. "Another brandy, Your Grace?" the server inquired. "Yes," Adrien said curtly, "and see if Lord William is available. I wish to discuss the racing season. Horses, that was an appropriate concern for a gentleman of his position, not the fate of one unremarkable girl who had failed to manage the demands of society." That night, Alone in his chambers at Blackwell House, Adrien saw her face again as sleep approached. Grey-blue eyes, or perhaps hazel, he had not looked closely enough, meeting him across a ballroom floor. The brief moment of contact before he dismissed her. Not plain, exactly, but unremarkable, forgettable. He told himself this until he convinced himself he believed it, until exhaustion finally claimed him, and he drifted into troubled sleep. But even as he slept, some part of him understood that he had lost something the previous night, had begun a transformation that would take years to complete, and would leave him fundamentally different from the man who had spoken those cruel words with such confidence. In her bedroom at Harrow House, Evelyn stood before her small wardrobe, packing by candlelight. She had few enough possessions that the work went quickly, clothing mostly, simple and unfashionable. A few books, including her mother's copy of Jane Eyre, with its spine cracked from repeated readings, its pages marked and stained with tears shed over the story of a girl who had been called plain, who had suffered and endured, and eventually found love. Evelyn had always loved that novel, perhaps too much, had identified with Jane too completely, had allowed herself to hope that perhaps she too might find someone who would see her truly. But life was not a novel, and Evelyn was not Jane Eyre. The garnet comb, carefully wrapped, a silver locket containing a lock of her mother's hair, these small objects that connected her to the woman who had loved her unconditionally for 12 years before dying. Outside her window, London continued its glittering existence. Somewhere ballrooms were lit, and beautiful women waltzed with titled men. Somewhere, Lady Beatrice accepted compliment. Somewhere the Duke attended to matters befitting his station. The world turned, utterly unchanged. Evelyn paused with Jane Eyre in her hands, remembering the heroine's declaration about women feeling just as men feel, needing exercise for their faculties just as men need. What would it be like to believe so completely in one's own worth that society's dismissal became irrelevant? She would never know. Or so she had always believed. But perhaps in Cornwall, far from the scrutiny that had measured her and found her wanting, she might discover something unexpected. She tucked the novel carefully into her trunk and closed the lid with finality that felt like ending and beginning simultaneously. Cornwall, then. Let us see what I might become when no one is watching. The journey to Cornwall required 4 days of travel that took Evelyn progressively farther from everything she had known. With each mile, London's smoke-stained elegance gave way to something wilder, more honest. Manicured parks surrendered to rolling countryside. The air changed. Coal smoke replaced by the scent of grass and earth and growing things. By the 3rd day, the landscape had transformed into something that might have belonged to a different world. Mountains rose with sublime indifference to human opinion. Water gathered in vast lakes that reflected the sky without caring whether anyone found them beautiful. When the carriage finally crested the last hill, when Evelyn saw Thornfield Cottage for the first time in over a decade, her first thought was that cottage was a misnomer. 3 stories of grey stone spread before her, looking as though it had grown from the landscape rather than been imposed upon it. The windows were dark, vacant eyes staring out at water and mountains. The gardens had long since surrendered to nature's preferences, transformed into something between cultivation and wilderness. And beyond it all, the lake itself, a vast body of water that seemed to stretch toward infinity, reflecting mountains and sky with perfect clarity. The sound was constant, gentle lapping of water against shore, wind moving across the surface. The coach door opened, and a woman in her 50s stood waiting. Her dress was simple grey wool, her face weathered by northern weather, her eyes sharp and assessing. "You will be Miss Winters then," the woman said. "I am Mrs. Wren. I have prepared the east wing rooms and laid fires throughout. Supper will be simple. We maintain no staff for elaborate London-style meals." Evelyn descended from the carriage, her legs unsteady. "Thank you, Mrs. Wren. I am grateful for your preparations." The older woman's expression softened slightly at Evelyn's genuine gratitude. "You look exhausted, miss. Come inside before this wind cuts through you. Cornwall welcomes no one gently, but it welcomes honestly, which is perhaps better than false gentleness concealing cruelty." The interior of Thornfield was clean but spare. Minimal furniture arranged with clear purpose, faded blue curtains, dark wood floors that echoed with each footstep. The fire in the drawing-room hearth provided warmth that transformed cold space into something almost welcoming. "I will bring your supper to the dining room within the hour," Mrs. Wren said. "The east bedroom is upstairs, first door on the left. I will return tomorrow morning to help you settle." Then she was gone, leaving Evelyn alone in this strange, stark house that was now her home. The first weeks passed in a haze of profound loneliness. This was not social isolation, not feeling unwanted in crowded rooms. This was absolute isolation, complete separation from human connection beyond brief daily interactions with Mrs. Wren, whose essential reserve ensured their relationship would never develop into friendship. Evelyn wandered the rooms of Thornfield like a lost spirit, mapping spaces without understanding them or feeling any sense of ownership. The drawing room with its struggling fire, the dining room where she took solitary meals, the morning room overlooking the wild garden. The library contained perhaps 30 books, whose leather bindings cracked with age. She wrote letters because writing gave her something to do. To her father, no response. To Lady Beatrice, dutiful reports neither requested nor acknowledged. To one acquaintance from finishing school, a single cold reply making clear that friendship had ended with Evelyn's exile. After that, Evelyn wrote only in her journal, pages filled with observations no one would ever read, descriptions of the lake's changing moods, catalogues of her own loneliness that grew more extensive and desperate as weeks became months. 3 months into her exile, a storm struck with violence that transformed the lake from tranquil mirror into something monstrous and alive. Evelyn stood at her bedroom window, watching nature's fury unfold with fascination bordering on terror. Waves rose higher than houses before crashing against shore with ground-shaking force. Wind tore branches from trees and sent them flying. It was beautiful and terrifying, a demonstration of power so far beyond human scale that witnessing it required fundamental recalibration of one's sense of importance. As she watched, something inside Evelyn cracked. Not gradual fracturing, but sudden break like ice giving way. "I am alone," she thought, "truly, completely alone. No one is coming to rescue me. No one is thinking of me. No one cares whether I live or die, except perhaps Mrs. Wren, who would care primarily because disposing of the body would require effort." The words should have been devastating. Instead, they brought strange clarity, unexpected peace, something that might almost have been freedom. And then quieter but more powerful. "Then I am free, free from expectations I could never meet, free from constant assessment by eyes that found me wanting, free from making myself small and acceptable." Here in this isolated manner, no one was watching. No one cared whether she was plain or beautiful, proper or improper, worthy or worthless. She could be anything or nothing. The choice was entirely hers. For the first time in her life, she possessed power to determine her own worth, independent of anyone else's opinion. The realization settled over her like benediction, like permission she had been waiting for all her life to simply be herself, without apology. The next morning brought a different Evelyn. She found Mrs. Wren in the kitchen and asked a direct question. "Is there a village nearby? Are there people who might benefit from someone who could teach reading and basic mathematics?" Mrs. Wren looked up with surprise. "There is Penrith, perhaps 3 miles along the lake path. Many families there with children who work rather than learn. The vicar's wife tries, but she is overwhelmed. I would like to meet her," Evelyn said. The decision was made before she fully understood its implications. "Would you provide an introduction?" The vicar's wife, Mrs. Pembroke, was a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and perpetually ink-stained fingers. She received Evelyn in the small vicarage parlour with tea and cautious welcome. "I confess I am surprised by your offer, Miss Winters," Mrs. Pembroke said. "Teaching is difficult work, often thankless." "I have never taught anyone anything," Evelyn admitted. "I do not know whether I will be successful or whether I have any talent for pedagogy, but I can read and write and perform basic mathematics, and surely those skills have value. And I have time, considerable time." Mrs. Pembroke studied her for a long moment, assessing capability rather than measuring beauty. "Very well. If you are willing to try, I am willing to provide an opportunity. Sunday afternoons, I will gather the children. We will begin with the basics and see how you manage." That first Sunday afternoon, 8 children gathered in the church vestry. Their hands were rough from work, their clothes showing patches and wear. They regarded Evelyn with curiosity and suspicion, uncertain what to expect from the London lady. Evelyn had no training, no methodology beyond her own education. But she had something perhaps more valuable, a desperate need to matter, to be useful, to discover that she possessed worth independent of beauty. She began with the alphabet, but she made it into a story rather than rote memorization. She gave each letter personality and adventure, transformed abstract symbols into characters children could remember because they had become invested in narrative. She taught them to write their names first rather than starting with meaningless practice words. Seeing one's own name take shape on slate seemed like magic, like power, like proof of existence. When young Sarah struggled with distinguishing B from D, Evelyn did not scold. She invented a story about two letters who were brothers always being confused until they learned to stand in ways that made their differences clear. Sarah laughed, genuinely amused, and suddenly understood. That laughter, that moment of comprehension breaking across a child's face, changed something fundamental in Evelyn's understanding of herself and her worth. 6 months became a year became 2. The teaching expanded beyond Sunday afternoons to 3 evenings weekly. Evelyn began writing curriculum, developing methods, discovering that she possessed talent for making complex ideas accessible. Her modest allowance stretched thin as she purchased books and slates and materials. She began selling possessions brought from London, transforming ball gowns she would never wear again into funds for primers. And something unexpected happened. The village, initially suspicious, began to trust her. Parents thanked her with tears when children read the first complete sentences. The work mattered. She mattered. Mrs. Pembroke commented one afternoon, "You have become rather remarkable, Miss Winters. The transformation from the uncertain woman who first approached me suggests that London's loss has been Cornwall's considerable gain." Evelyn looked up, genuinely surprised. "I have merely found a purpose that London never offered me. I have discovered that worth can be self-determined rather than assigned by others." 3 years into her exile, Evelyn received a letter from London. The envelope bore an unfamiliar seal, an address in Belgravia suggesting wealth and position. The letter was from Mr. Lauren Beaumont, described as a philanthropist and educational reformer. He had somehow heard of her work in Cornwall and wished to discuss expanding her methods to other regions. He offered funding, resources, professional training, connections to a network of similar schools. He also mentioned that he would be travelling to Cornwall in 6 weeks and would welcome the opportunity to meet with her. Evelyn read the letter 3 times, unable to quite believe that someone in London cared about her work, considered it valuable enough to warrant personal visit and offer of support. "You are smiling," Mrs. Wren observed. "Good news in the post?" "Someone wishes to support the school," Evelyn said, still processing implications. "Someone thinks what we are doing here deserves expansion." Gee. That evening, for the first time since arriving at Thornfield, Evelyn stood before her mirror and truly looked at herself. Same dark blonde hair, same hazel eyes, same unremarkable features London had called plain and forgettable. But something had changed, not in her face, but in the way she inhabited it. Confidence in posture, steadiness of gaze. "They said I was plain," she whispered to her reflection. "They said I was a cautionary example. They were wrong about what I might become if freed from their judgment." 5 years had passed since that night at Lady Ashford's ball, since the Duke had dismissed her, since Lady Beatrice had banished her. 5 years of transformation from a girl who apologised for existing into a woman who knew her worth. And then a letter arrived from London that changed everything once more. Her father had died. A memorial service would be held at St. James's Church in 3 weeks. Her presence was requested. Evelyn stood on the cliff-top path above Thornfield, watching sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and gold and deep crimson. Behind her, the manor glowed with lamplight. It was warm, alive, utterly hers. "I return to London not as the girl they banished," she said to the wind, "but as the woman I have become. Whatever happens, they cannot take that from me. They cannot take 5 years of knowing I matter." London had not changed. Same smoke-darkened buildings, same rigid hierarchies, same obsessive concern with surfaces. But Evelyn had changed fundamentally. Returning felt less like homecoming than visiting a foreign country, whose customs she remembered, but no longer accepted. The memorial service brought society's elite to St. James's Church. Evelyn sat in the front pew in a simple black dress she had made herself, feeling no shame about its plainness. Lady Beatrice sat beside her in elaborate mourning that had clearly cost a fortune. Whispers rippled through assembled mourners as they recognized Evelyn, or failed to recognize her. "That is the Winters girl. She looks so different. Strange. I heard she has been running some sort of educational charity in Cornwall. How peculiar." The service proceeded with traditional elements, but then the vicar announced that Evelyn wished to speak. Beatrice's hand shot out to grasp Evelyn's wrist. "You cannot possibly. It is inappropriate. Women do not speak at memorial services." Evelyn gently but firmly removed Beatrice's hand from her arm, stood, and moved to the front of the church with calm purpose. She faced assembled society without fear, without the terror that would have paralyzed her 5 years earlier. "My father was not a perfect man," she began, voice clear and steady. "I do not stand before you to pretend otherwise, to transform his very ordinary failings into extraordinary virtues." In a pew toward the back, Adrien felt his hands grip the wooden seat until his knuckles went white. "He taught me," Evelyn continued, though perhaps not in ways he intended, that worth must be self-determined rather than assigned by others. "He taught me through his absence to value presence, through his silence to value voice." Lady Ashford made a small sound of outrage. Several others shifted and murmured, demonstrating discomfort with speech that violated every convention. "But I also learned that exile can be education," Evelyn said, voice softening slightly without losing strength. "That dismissal can be freedom. That being forgotten by this world might mean being remembered by myself in ways that matter more than social approval." Her gaze swept across the assembled elite, touching briefly on faces that had mocked her, dismissed her. "Many of you have not thought of me in years. I assure you with complete sincerity that I have thought of you even less. Your opinions have mattered not at all to the life I built, to the work I accomplished with people who measured worth through different metrics than you employ." Somewhere in the back rows, someone began to applaud slowly. The sound grew louder as others joined, until perhaps a third of the congregation participated. Beatrice sat frozen, unable to process Evelyn's transformation from compliant victim to confident woman. Evelyn returned to her seat without additional comment. After the service, a reception line formed outside the church. Mourners offered condolences and barely disguised curiosity. "So sorry for your loss, Miss Winters," Lady Ashford gushed with false warmth. "And we are simply fascinated by your school endeavours. How quaint." "Education is not quaint, Lady Ashford," Evelyn replied with a smile that contained no warmth but projected perfect politeness. "It is transformation, liberation, provision of tools that allow people to determine their own futures." Mr. Lauren Beaumont appeared through the crowd, a tall man in his early 40s with kind eyes. "Miss Winters, I hope you received my letter regarding collaboration. I have been following your work through colleagues in Cornwall." Before Evelyn could respond, a different voice cut through conversation, a voice she had not heard in 5 years but recognized instantly. Miss Winters, Adrien Blackwell, Duke of Blackwell, stood before her in impeccable morning dress, his grey eyes meeting hers with an expression that combined recognition with uncertainty, with something that might have been fear. "Your Grace," Evelyn said, her voice neutral, giving nothing away, neither forgiveness nor continued anger. Simply acknowledgement. Silence expanded between them. Around them, the reception continued, conversations swirling. "I wish to offer my condolences on your father's passing," Adrien said finally, the words emerging carefully. "Thank you," Evelyn said simply, offering nothing more. Adrien seemed to struggle, seemed to want to say more, but found himself unable to articulate whatever thoughts or feelings or apologies he might wish to offer. Mr. Lauren, perhaps sensing awkwardness, addressed Evelyn again. "Might we discuss collaboration? Your methods deserve wider implementation, Miss Winters. What you have accomplished in Cornwall demonstrates that education can be transformative when delivered with genuine respect for students." "I would be pleased to discuss possibilities," Evelyn said, grateful for an excuse to shift attention from the Duke. As Lauren described his vision for a network of schools, as Evelyn listened and asked questions, Adrien stood nearby, unable to leave, unable to participate, unable to do anything except watch the woman he had dismissed demonstrate remarkable intelligence and passion. The Duke had never felt more foolish, more aware of having missed something valuable, having destroyed something precious. 3 days later, as Evelyn prepared to return to Cornwall, having established initial plans with Mr. Lauren, an unexpected visitor appeared at Beatrice's door. The Duke of Blackwell requested an audience with Miss Winters. Beatrice granted permission for a brief meeting in the drawing room, with the door left appropriately open. Adrien entered looking substantially less composed than usual. Miss Winters, I apologize for intruding on your time. I wanted to speak with you privately regarding events of the past 5 years. Evelyn regarded him steadily, neither encouraging nor discouraging, simply waiting. I was unforgivably cruel to you that night at Lady Ashford's ball, Adrien continued, voice rough with emotion. My words were calculated to wound, designed to elevate myself through your diminishment, chosen without any consideration for you as a person. He paused, struggling with words that did not come easily. I have spent 5 years attempting to understand why I behaved so abominably. I have examined my upbringing, my values, my participation in systems that required some people to be elevated through systematic destruction of others. I have recognized that I became my father, a man I claimed to despise, who destroyed my mother through exactly the kind of casual cruelty I inflicted on you. Evelyn felt something shift, not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps beginning of understanding. Your suffering does not excuse what you did to me, she said quietly, but firmly. Your awareness of reasons does not undo damage or restore years I lost or erase pain I experienced. Adrien nodded, accepting her words without protest. I know. I am not asking for forgiveness I do not deserve. I am simply trying to acknowledge the truth of what I did, to take responsibility for the harm I caused. Why now? Evelyn asked. Why seek me out after 5 years? Adrien was quiet for a long moment. Because seeing you at the memorial service, hearing you speak with such confidence and purpose, recognizing that you have built a life of meaning while I have merely maintained position, made it impossible to continue avoiding truth, that I have wasted 5 years being exactly what society expected, while you used the same 5 years to become someone genuinely worth knowing. He met her eyes directly. I have been donating to your school, not to ease my guilt, though it has not eased my guilt at all, but because your work deserves support, because what you are doing matters in ways my entire existence has never mattered. Evelyn absorbed this information, tried to determine what it meant. Your donations helped students who needed resources I could not provide alone. They made a difference in real lives. I would like to continue supporting your work, Adrien said quietly. And beneath the words, Evelyn heard the subtext suggesting desire for connection beyond merely donor and recipient. I must return to Cornwall, Evelyn said, not answering his implicit question directly. My actual life and actual work await me. Before Adrien could respond, the door opened, and Mr. Lauren appeared with news that could not wait. Miss Winters, I have just received the most interesting proposal. There is a gentleman from Scotland, Mr. Art Dealer, who runs a successful publishing business. He has expressed interest in your teaching methods and wonders whether you might be willing to write a treatise describing your approaches. Evelyn felt a simultaneous surge of excitement and apprehension. That sounds like a remarkable opportunity, though I would need time to consider what such commitment would require. Of course, Lauren said warmly. Mr. Dealer will be in London next week and hopes to meet with you. He is also offering substantial payment for the treatise, payment that would allow you to expand your school significantly. Adrien, who had been silent during this exchange, watched Evelyn's face transform from wariness regarding him to genuine interest in Lauren's proposal. It seems you are much in demand, Miss Winters. Your work has attracted the attention of people who matter. Evelyn turned to look at Adrien directly. Yes, she said simply, neither agreeing with the implied compliment nor rejecting it. As Lauren continued discussing logistics, as Adrien stood nearby unable to truly participate, the door opened once more and Lady Beatrice swept in. Evelyn, your presence is required at the Worthington dinner party tonight. I have already accepted on your behalf. Evelyn felt old anger stir. But 5 years of building life independent of Beatrice's control had changed her fundamentally. I will not be attending the Worthington dinner party, Evelyn said quietly but with finality. I am meeting with Mr. Lauren and Mr. Dealer tomorrow to discuss educational partnerships. That is how I choose to spend my limited time in London before returning to Cornwall, where my actual life awaits me. Beatrice's face went through several colours. You will regret this defiance. You will find yourself completely cut off from family support. I am already isolated from your version of respectable society, Evelyn replied with calm that made her words more devastating than anger. I have been isolated since you sent me away 5 years ago, and I have discovered that isolation from your world has been the greatest gift you could have given me. Being cut off from your version of family support has freed me to build actual support among people who value me genuinely." She turned to Lauren and smiled with genuine warmth. "Shall we meet tomorrow morning at 10? As Evelyn and Lauren made plans, as Adrien watched with expression mixing admiration with regret, with something that might have been longing, Beatrice stood frozen with realization that she had lost control completely. The girl she had sent away had returned as a woman she could neither control nor diminish. 1 week later, Evelyn stood in the garden of Thornfield Cottage, watching the sun set over the lake. She had returned from London 3 days earlier, returned to the life she had built, returned to students who had missed her. The week in London had been overwhelming in ways both terrible and wonderful. It had resurrected pain she thought she had transcended, while also proving she actually had transcended it. It had forced her to confront the past, while proving that the past no longer had power to destroy her. Meeting with Mr. Dealer had been productive beyond expectations. The commission to write a treatise came with payment generous enough to hire 2 additional teachers and expand the school significantly, to purchase more books, to establish a lending library for village families. Mr. Lauren had offered partnership in establishing a network of similar schools across England and Scotland. He suggested she might travel between locations, advising and training others. And the Duke, Adrien, as she now thought of him, though she had not yet spoken his given name aloud, had appeared repeatedly throughout that week, not intrusively, but persistently, not demanding attention, but requesting it with humility that seemed genuine. He had asked, finally, before she departed, whether she might permit him to correspond with her, to continue supporting her work, to perhaps visit Cornwall in several months if she would not find such a visit unwelcome. She had not answered immediately. She had taken time to consider what she actually wanted. "I cannot promise anything beyond correspondence," she had finally said. "I cannot promise forgiveness that I may never be capable of granting. I cannot promise that I will ever see you as anything other than a person who wounded me profoundly." Adrien nodded, accepting her terms without protest. "But I can offer friendship," she continued. "I can offer the possibility of knowing each other genuinely rather than merely corresponding about safe subjects. I can offer the truth that I have not entirely closed my heart to you, despite every rational reason to do exactly that." She signed the letter simply Evelyn, without title or formality. The following months brought a routine that felt simultaneously new and established. She taught her students with renewed energy. She expanded the school with additional teachers. She wrote her treatise with discipline and focus. She corresponded with Adrien weekly. Letters grew progressively more personal as months passed, as trust developed incrementally through careful revelations and honest responses, and slowly, carefully, with caution that came from having been hurt so badly, Evelyn allowed herself to hope that perhaps Adrien's transformation was genuine. Spring came to Cornwall, with an explosion of green and flowers and warmth. And with spring came a letter from Adrien, announcing that he would like to visit if she would permit it. Evelyn agreed with a mixture of anticipation and terror, acknowledging that she would never feel fully ready, that some risks simply had to be taken without certainty. Adrien arrived on a warm May afternoon, travelling by carriage along the lake path. Evelyn waited in the garden, surrounded by roses that bloomed without requiring permission, that simply existed because existence required no justification. She watched him approach, recognized him despite years and distance and transformation they had both undergone. "Miss Winters," he said when he reached her, stopping several feet away, acknowledging uncertainty. "Adrien," she said, testing his given name aloud for the first time. They stood looking at each other, neither quite knowing what to say. "Your home is beautiful," Adrien said finally, breaking silence with an observation that was both obviously true and somewhat absurd. "Thank you," Evelyn said, recognizing his nervousness because she felt it too. "Would you like to see the school?" They walked together through the village toward the school, maintaining careful distance, talking about students and methods and challenges with ease that came from months of correspondence. At the school, Adrien watched children learn with hunger he had never experienced because learning had always been available to him. He watched Evelyn teach with patience and respect and genuine care. "They love you," he said quietly after the lesson ended. "They know I love them," Evelyn corrected gently. They returned to Thornfield as afternoon faded toward evening, sat in the drawing room with tea and conversation that grew progressively more personal. "I want you to know," Adrien said, "that I have not come here seeking to win you or to claim you or to transform your independence into dependence. I have come because knowing you through letters has been the most meaningful relationship I have ever experienced." He paused, gathering courage. "I am falling in love with you. I do not expect you to love me in return. I do not expect you to feel anything beyond perhaps tentative friendship, but I wanted you to know the truth." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. This was different from any previous declaration. This was not about her beauty or her acceptability. This was about who she actually was. "I do not know if I love you," she said honestly. "I do not know if I am capable of loving a man who hurt me as badly as you did, regardless of how much you have changed. I do not know if trust can be rebuilt after being so completely shattered." She paused, met his eyes directly. "But I know that I care about you. I know that I value your letters and your support, and your willingness to examine yourself honestly, rather than defending indefensible behavior." She reached out and took his hand, first physical contact between them, beyond initial greeting. "I know that I want to continue knowing you. I want to discover whether what we have built through letters can survive translation into actual presence." Adrien's hand tightened around her, not possessively, but gratefully. "That is more than I deserve and more than I hoped for." They sat together as evening deepened into night, hands joined, talking and falling silent, and talking again, building something fragile but real. And Evelyn, sitting in her own home surrounded by life she had built, allowed herself to hope that perhaps this time would be different, that perhaps Adrien had truly changed, that perhaps they could build something meaningful if they both chose courage over protection. She did not know whether they would succeed, but she knew she was willing to try. And for now, with his hand warm in hers and future stretching uncertain but full of possibility before, that willingness felt like enough.